The crisis in Venezuela has world leaders divided. The U.S. is backing the opposition leader Juan Guaido, and Russia supports Nicolas Maduro. Pope Francis isn't picking sides, but he is urging peace. Antonio Mora is the editor-in-chief of newsandnews.com. He's a Latin American affairs expert and a former news anchor on ABC's Good Morning America, and he joins us now from Miami. Antonio, thank you so much for being with us.
Liz, always my
Antonio,
pleasure.
could the Venezuelan crisis become even more violent? For instance, is a civil war looming or military intervention from the outside?
There could be violence in so many different ways, Liz. This week, Guaido, the president who's been recognized by most of the major countries in the Americas and by most European countries, has called for more protests. Already there was a lot of violence last week. Dozens of people were likely killed, and who knows how many others were injured. So there's level on that violence, just the repression of protests. There could be violence on other levels. If Guaido, who has been talking, or at least he says he's been talking to some members of the military, manages to get some military defection, there could be infighting at the military level, and that, of course, would be a worrisome development. The bigger concern would be if there were a confrontation with the United States or sort of alliance of other countries. The danger of that happening immediately seemed to have faded a bit when Maduro backed down. You know, he expelled American diplomats. The U.S. said, "You do not have any authority. The new president is Guaido. He's the only one who can expel diplomats." Maduro gave them a deadline for Saturday, and then he backed off, and they've extended it for a few weeks.
Antonio, Pope Francis is now speaking out publicly, saying he fears violence in Venezuela. Should the Latin American pontiff be doing other things to prevent a catastrophe?
Liz, that's a very good question, and it's a question many Venezuelans have been asking themselves for the past couple of years since the big protests started back in 2017. Venezuelans are upset that he has not been more emphatic about the terrible human rights violations that are going on in Venezuela, about tremendous hunger, the lack of medicines. He has really not been a forceful presence on Venezuela. As opposed to the Venezuelan Catholic Church, the hierarchy there, the bishops in Venezuela, have actually been quite strong and very supportive of the opposition and the demonstrators and the need for their rights to be respected.
Antonio, you have very keen insight into Venezuela, obviously. What's next in the near term and, of course, in the broader future? Quickly.
I think it's going to depend on how continuous the pressure can be on the Venezuelan people's side and also on the international side. Maduro will continue to have the support of Russia, to a lesser extent China, and of course Cuba. But the rest of the world now seems to finally be taking seriously the fact that this is a tremendous catastrophe. One of the richest countries in the world has now become one of the poorest. Almost 90% of the people there are living in poverty. Something needs to be done. The question inside Venezuela, to some extent, is going to be two questions. One, will the military turn on Maduro? And two, will the people from the poorer neighborhoods of Caracas and other cities turn against Maduro? And so far, that seems to be the case. Many of the protests last week were started in the poorer areas. So this is now, nobody can argue that this is a middle-class opposition. This is an opposition that goes across all classes.
All right, Antonio, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. I know you have friends and family in Venezuela. Our prayers are with them. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Liz. My pleasure.